One of my all-time favorite lenses for my Hasselblad 203 is the 110 f2. 110 f2. One of the fastest medium format lenses ever made. There were a few other f2s. I don't think anyone made a medium format lens that was faster than f2, but this lens has lived on my 203 for years, and I love it. And I love it because it's just totally beautiful. It's not great, wide open, but totally acceptable as far as I'm concerned. And I've really grown to love it. I picked it up from a friend of mine about, well, a long time ago, probably 10 years ago, and 2009 actually, 13 years ago. Anyway, $900, and it is the F version. So one of the very first versions. I'm assuming it's probably from the 1980s. Design, from, in their early 80s, something like that. So it's closing in on, easily 40 years old. And so anyway, yeah, so it's a great lens. And then I bought, at one point, in a moment of weakness, a Fuji GFX 50R from a friend of mine. And a couple of years ago, Fuji announced a 110 f2. And I thought to myself, I gotta have one of those. So I bought a 110 f2. Probably the most expensive lens I've ever purchased. And then, of course, I wanted to, I've had both of these lenses for, well, this one for years and that one actually for a couple of years now too. And I wanted to see just how good this is compared to this. And what we have is 50-year-old probably lens design, manual focus, glass that was, ground to the tolerances that film required. Not that discerning, I guess. Brand new, this 110 f2 was specifically designed to work with this camera. I use these lenses for portraits. And so what we did is, over the course of a couple of different jobs, I had an opportunity to shoot the lenses side by side. And what we did is I wanted to maximize the lenses in terms of how they work properly. So the Fuji was on autofocus, and so then I could, thankfully put the focus point anywhere I wanted. The Hasselblad was not on autofocus because it doesn't exist, so I used focus peaking. The first opportunity I had was with a friend of mine, and she was gracious enough to come into the studio, and we shot a bunch of different film, including some 4x5 that I accidentally cross-processed, which made for some interesting results. And so I shot the 110 f2 and the 110 f2 wide open with her. And then another job we had where we were photographing some actors, and we had 3 or 4 different actors come through over the course of a day. And again, I shot the 110 f2 and the 110 f2 side by side, same photographer, same subject, same light, same setup, same aperture. And I tried not to get too carried away with messing with the photos in Photoshop or in Capture One for this example. And here's what I expected. I expected that this lens would perform much better than this lens for several reasons. One, it's 40 years newer. 2, it's specifically designed to work with this camera. And I was amazed at how well this lens, the Hasselblad from the 80s when I was a kid, held up. And when I say amazed, I mean like it was really hard to tell the photos apart. Amazed. The Fuji is sharper, but not that much sharper. It has more contrast, hardly surprised. The lenses render images a slightly different color. Again, no surprise there. That I was astonished at how well the Hasselblad, kept up. The issues are that wide open, especially at f2, I don't know what the technical term is for it, but you get a bit of bloom, a bit of just a sort of low contrast. It just doesn't really have much in the way of snap. But as soon as you stop down to f2.8 or f4, it is really nice. And this lens, of course, at f2, it's really nice, and then at 2.8 and f4, it's nice as well. Especially with portraits, you don't necessarily want situations where the lenses are really clinical and really sharp. And one of the reasons why I sold my Sigma 50mm art lens is, well, there were 2 reasons. One, it weighed too much, and 2, it was just really shrill, and I didn't really care for it. And personal preference. And that was my major concern with this lens, is that it would be clinical and very kind of, like it came out of a laboratory, whereas this lens, it feels like it came out of, a glass factory, with a lot more, more mojo, I guess, is what you might refer to it as. And but what I found actually is that this 110 f2 was unbelievably beautiful and is really close to this one. And looking at the images on a screen, really hard to tell them apart. Personal preference would say that I actually prefer what this lens gives you, but given how much of a challenge it is to focus, even with focus peaking, this lens is definitely the lens that I would probably shoot with more often, just because it's just, it's just easier to get the images. And, and so the Hasselblad lens will go back on the Hasselblad. And, but it is a worthy companion to go onto this. And I just used a really simple, adapter to put the lens on. But it is a worthy companion to the Fujifilm. And then at this point, when I was planning out my what I'm talking to you about, I thought what you can do is you can spend a lot less money on a 110 f2 rather than spend a whole bunch of money on a 110 f2, as long as you don't mind focus peaking and focusing manually. And lo and behold, I looked up these lenses, and they're the same price. And I don't know what happened there. I mean, I guess the secret's out in terms of how great this lens is, but I was astonished. I thought, well, you could get it for $1,000. Yeah, no, you can't. And so that kind of, torpedoes that argument a little bit. But, I mean, really what it comes down to is that I've been, I'm fortunate enough to have both lenses to be able to try them out. It was super fun, and I was just amazed. I mean, I could not believe how well this held up to this. And when I talk about held up well, I mean chromatic aberrations, bloom, micro contrast, all of those things that you're looking for in a nice, in a solid lens, especially on a 50 megapixel sensor. This one, I mean, I wasn't asking too much of it. I wasn't shooting into the sun. I wasn't, trying to get like supremely dark shadows and stuff like that to see what I could bring it out. It was much more of a test, day to day, as opposed to a test of the limits of the lens on this camera. But really, when it came down to it, just in terms of what I used it for and what I needed out of it, it absolutely, ticked every box. And the only thing that limited this lens was just the simple fact that it doesn't have autofocus and hard to use eye detect on this when it doesn't work. But so for what that's worth, there you go. So the two lenses are worthy competitors, even though they're 40 years apart. And yeah, so that's all I have to say to you today about that. And I apologize for the fact that those of us who have these lenses and love them, the 110 f2 for instance, my Xenotar 150-2.8 is another one, that the prices have just gone absolutely stratospheric because I guess the secret's out. So, sorry to add to that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and find yourself a 110 f2 and give it a shot.